I'm Luca Giliberti, contributing writer for Gold Derby, and I'm joined today by Tyler James Williams, who plays Gregory Eddie on Abbott Elementary. And Tyler, you've been playing this character for 3 seasons now, and I'm just going to assume that you know him quite well at this point. But the writers are constantly, adding new layers to these characters, giving them these new quirks. So when was the last time they wrote in a new quirk for Gregory or had him say or do something that genuinely surprised you, that made you go, oh, I didn't expect that from him at all?
It happened this season.
Mm-hmm.
Mm, when is this gonna air? When's this coming out? Because there is, there's a big one that actually happens later on in the season that
Mm-hmm.
gave me so much context. I think will also give the audience so much context as to who Gregory is and why he is the way he is, particularly how he relates to not only, I think, Janine, but everyone that he's had in his love life.
That's interesting. That's something to look forward to. But is that something that kind of keeps you on your toes as an actor to know that while you may know this character in and out, the writers may throw something at you that you're going to have to make work, and that kind of requires you to be constantly flexible and constantly, ready to adapt to changes that may come your way?
It does, right? It is a challenge, but I think what our writers room does particularly well is that they find a way to add another layer that usually adds another layer of depth.
Mm-hmm.
So as an
Mm-hmm.
actor, we always kind of want to go deeper into the work and deeper into the character. So if
Right.
somebody's opening up a door at the what you thought was the basement of this character, just giving you more depth, that's what we're always looking for. So it is difficult in the sense that it's something new to handle, but it's
Mm-hmm.
welcomed because I just feel further locked into who Gregory is because now there's another idiosyncrasy that helps me understand him further.
Yeah, of course. And, before we get into some of the depth of the character, because there's so much to discuss there, I just want to get your reaction to reading the Jeremy Allen Black scene, in the premiere in which Gregory, flexes his biceps to kind of get Ava to return to her old ways, because that's, after Ava rejects him, you can kind of see that makes him feel very vulnerable. He's kind of like
Mm-hmm.
embarrassed. So what was your reaction to reading that scene and also to filming it?
Um, One, I pride myself on being able to find jokes in really anything at any given time.
Mm-hmm.
So I was immediately embarrassed that I didn't see Jeremy Allen Black coming. Um, I don't remember who it was in the writers' room who wrote that, but I was like, man, this is why you're here.
So
Um,
smart.
so smart. I thought that scene was really a fun way to get into this, right? For the tables to be turned and have to from Gregory from being so objectified
Right.
for so long to then now trying to use that to his advantage was very interesting. So in the moment after, that wasn't really scripted. Him feeling so vulnerable wasn't scripted. It was really
Mm-hmm.
something that when we shot it, Randall Einhorn, who was directing the episode, and I were
Mm-hmm.
trying to figure that out. We were sitting there going like, how does he feel that now he's done this? Try to
Yeah.
use it to his advantage, and it did not work. And I think it was Randall's idea where he was like, let's see what happens if he like becomes very insecure.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what came out of it. And I think that's the beauty of making a choice like that, to
Yeah.
have Gregory shift the power position. Because now we figure out all these other little things about him from that decision.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it makes total sense for him because that's not something he would usually do. He wouldn't just usually
No.
stand there and start flexing his bicep. So I think the reaction makes total sense, and I just love that moment so much. I love how the
No.
show incorporates. I told Randall Einhorn this when I interviewed him last week. I love how the show incorporates these pop culture moments into the show
Mm-hmm.
without making them feel forced. I think
Right.
that's kind of a high wire act that the show pulls off.
And hopefully it's a time capsule as well. Like hopefully,
Oh yeah.
when people rewatch this years from now, they'll be like, right, that was in history. Jeremy Allen White was
Right.
having a huge moment. And it was like, yeah, that's what I look forward to on the rewatch.
Yeah, absolutely. And not to get too dramatic here because Abbott is anything but a drama, but something that
Mm-hmm.
the one of the things that I that the show really does well is explore Gregory's perfectionism or his strive
Yeah.
for perfection, and how his definition thereof has kind of changed over the course of the 3 seasons. Because at the beginning of the show, he's so adamant on on becoming the principal, on landing the principal position. But we see throughout season one that he kind of falls in love with teaching. So 3 seasons in, how would you say he defined success for himself? And how is that definition any different from how he maybe defined it when he first started at Abbott?
I think for Gregory, success has changed from the big picture to the smaller picture. Um, when he first comes into Abbott, he sees success from this kind of godlike view, like in the sense of like what gives me the most power, right? What do I think will allow me to affect the most change? And I think that's why his position is so rigid and how he wants things done, because he thinks that's what change is. And then we see in this season, we have the Alex episode where he realizes it boils down to just getting one kid to go to school. You get that one kid to stay in school, that butterfly effect will be greater than you running this school. That's where the important work is. So I think now he's learned how to root himself in these tiny day by day successes that no one would imagine would be that, consequential, but ultimately are.
Yeah, and that's a much healthier way of going after it, right? Because I think the show has also explored how striving for perfectionism can have such an emotional toll on a person. And I think, like you said, doing the day by day is honestly just a much better way of approaching it. And I love that we got to see that. And something that I also really love about Gregory is that he's still in many ways unapologetic about his ways, right? Like I absolutely love that he is comfortable saying that he values alone time, that he doesn't want to want to take responsibility for these kids who want to hang out in his classroom and seek good relationship advice from him. I don't think we see that often on TV, do we?
No, we don't. And that's something that I'm very passionate about. And like in that scene particular in Gregory's Garden Goofballs, where the kids are in there, we were very specific about the choice of book that he's reading. He's reading Quiet by Susan Cain, which explores that as an idea, right? Is the idea that introverts are oftentimes seen as people who need to be helped into extrovertism. And Gregory sees the value in who he is. He sees how Ava, who's very much so extroverted, she has flaws here. She can whip everybody around her into a frenzy and everyone loves her. But there are flaws in this, what I bring to this school. And this also goes into him now accepting his role at Abbott. He understands that like what he brings here actually brings value. He needs to remain himself in order for the school to function and work.
And that's so important because I feel like we don't see a lot of programs that normalize introverts. Because like you said, the way the world perceives introverts is that they have to be extroverted. And I love that Gregory kind of represents that is not the case, that you can be introverted and that is completely fine, that you have a value. And what is also interesting about Gregory though is that he's not set in his ways, right? We see that he actually listens to people, or that he really listens to people, that he is, willing to step out of his comfort zone, willing to be open to trying different things. Like at the end of the 3rd episode, he lets the boys hang out in the classroom. So I kind of like that as well. Is that also interesting for you to then play?
I think, yeah, that was one of the things that when we first started the show was one of the first, I think, major deep discussions Quentin and I had about Gregory. And it was from the scene where he dances with his kids in season 1. And we were talking about what motivates that, right? And then that was one of those things that I had been discussing with her, was this idea that we can't make it that Gregory needs to learn to be fundamentally different. He doesn't need to learn not to be introverted and become an extrovert. He does need to learn, though, that flexibility that you're talking about, how to exist in that space while also being ready to learn and try something new, because you're dealing with children and it may be the most effective way to get to them. So I think those 2 episodes for me were very much so connected. One, it was I think the first one was a bigger fight to get him to that moment. And in the Goofballs episode, you see him very quickly begin to listen to the people around him and then find a way to do it his way.
And that's just refreshing, because a lot of perfectionists sometimes, like I said, they're kind of set in their ways. They don't listen to anyone. They don't take advice. They don't want to change anything. But as a teacher, you kind of have to. You're in a position where you have to be flexible, like you said. So I think putting him in that environment, in that school environment, does something so interesting to the character.
It does. And especially him working with now older kids. I think him
Yes.
teaching the younger grades allows him to have a bit more control. Um, but there's just another step where I think it's brilliant on the writer's room side to step him outside of his comfort zone with a grade that is more difficult to deal with because they're fully fleshed out people. But it's just furthering his growth ultimately, and that's really all we want.
Absolutely. And you've also talked about how gardening kind of serves as kind of a counterbalance to his strive for perfectionism, for his strive for perfection. And then in the most recent episode, we see that the Garden Goofballs, which is this gardening and outreach program that he proposed, is approved for funding by the school district. So without giving anything away about the upcoming episodes, could you briefly talk about, what this program means to him and what potential it creates for him?
I think ultimately Gregory, once he made his decision to be at Abbott for good, he wanted to leave his mark on this school. And this garden is becoming his way to do that. I think it's a beautiful device to show the time that he's put in here and how it's growing and flourishing and all of that. And it's something that we're definitely going to continue to talk about and lean into and grow. I think if people are watching this show from a very smart perspective, you'll see the metaphor there of Gregory's time at this school and what this garden is doing. I think also what it does from an acting perspective is it roots me even more in why he stays. That's one of the difficulties, I think, with this show and dealing with the conversation about teachers and teacher retention in general. Everyone needs a why because it's not an easy job. You're not getting paid enough. It's you're expending so much energy. What keeps you here every day? And I think that garden is a actual living, breathing thing that keeps him tied to this school. And I think that's just really brilliant. And I'm really grateful to be able to have that and play with that.
Yeah, I love that aspect. I can't wait to see where it goes because I mean, it's obviously been part of the show since the beginning, but I feel like this is a new step for him. I feel like this will just open up so many more, possibilities for the character, and I can't wait to see the direction he goes in. And it's also interesting to think about perfectionism in the context of delivering comedy because I talked to William Sanford Davis the other day, and he was talking about how sometimes when you have some of those group scenes in which you're just bouncing off of one another, that even when someone misses a beat, you just have to continue. You just have to continue on, continue working. And you've talked about how you think comedies really thrive when they are a little bit chaotic and a little bit messy. And that was also kind of the case in season 3. So could you expand on that a little bit?
There was something about, I think, to keep it in context, we came back a week after the actors' strike ended. So there was something really chaotic about the way the season started. You know what I mean? We didn't have this month and a half of prep that we usually do to kind of get settled in. We were sitting twiddling our thumbs, hoping for the best, and then a week later you're on set. And I think there was a certain amount of rust, I think, and dust that we were trying to shake off when that happened because we had just been sitting for the last 6 to 9 months. But I think it brought a very interesting color to the show this season. Season 3 to me will be defined as the season that survived the strike. And watching it from that perspective shows you how comedy can thrive in the midst of having to, for lack of better words, throw something together really quickly.
Yeah, of course.
It couldn't have been the original plan that we had. And I think that there was something really fun about that this year. You felt it in the energy from the actors. Chris Perfetti brought that energy for sure. And the things that he just added to scenes without telling anybody. It'll be nice to get back to our usual model for 4, but I like the chaotic departure that was 3. It shows that comedy can still thrive. And I think it really is a testament to our writer's room and our ability to kind of just bring things together on the fly.
It must have been really hard not to break when you have Chris Perfetti adding things, right?
I failed several times. He's on another level this year, man. And that's what I love about an ensemble is it feels like a sports team. You know what I mean? They're the people who you expect to come out and give you 30. But then every now and then somebody just decides I have an open look and I'm going to take it. And
Right.
that's what he's been, him and William. And I feel like a lot of our guest cast did that this year too,
Yeah.
which was really, I was really grateful for, because in a lot of ways it was a difficult season to get done. For everyone to step up and
Mm.
go, I'm going to carry a little bit more of that weight, and hunt these jokes. I really appreciated watching.
Yeah, and since you already mentioned Chris, let's actually talk about Gregory's relationship with Jacob, because that
Yeah,
might be my favorite dynamic on this entire show. And I really
love
mean
it.
that. What do you think it is about Jacob that draws Gregory to him, especially after Janine leaves Abbott? And how do you think the two characters complement each other?
I've been saying recently, the seasons 1 through 3 is not about the will they won't they of Janine, it's the will they won't they of Gregory and Jacob.
Yes.
That's what a lot of people have been missing. Um, Gregory, since he got to Abbott, has been looking for a sympathetic ear, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in a lot of ways, he finds that with Janine, but his emotional feelings for her complicate that a bit.
Yeah.
I think what he found over time, or Jacob simply wore him down enough to see, was that he did have another sympathetic ear here. He had a male perspective. He had somebody who was also as emotionally involved in him and Janine as he was, which
Mm-hmm.
we could talk about whether or not that's healthy or unhealthy, but it's there. He found an ally that I didn't think he knew that he would have. And to me, it's one of the more beautiful relationships I've ever had the pleasure of playing. To start as an actor very anti in a lot of ways with the character
Right.
is difficult. You know what I mean? Because it's really
Of
hard to
course.
connect with people in the scene because you're so
Mm-hmm.
anti them. The
Yeah.
unraveling of that. Now I have more people to, it makes the scene more dynamic, to be able to throw a look to, or to have a very specific kind of voice and interaction with. We see a softer side of Gregory that's more vulnerable with Jacob that we would have never
Exactly.
seen.
Exactly. That's what I was kind of thinking about, because even if you think about the fifth episode, when Gregory is very concerned about Jacob and his, situation with Zach, with his boyfriend Zach, and Gregory's kind of like, just break up with him, or you need to break up with him. And
Mhm.
I feel like Jacob needs to hear that in that moment. I know he doesn't really credit Gregory enough at the end of the episode, but I feel like that kind of, in a way, not motivated him to break up, but that kind of gave him like the permission to do it. Like, it's okay. So I just love that dynamic so much.
And that's what I mean by, Gregory is learning that he doesn't have to change who he is,
Yeah.
but be flexible, because part of who he is needs to exist here. No one else is going to tell that to Jacob in the way that Gregory is going to say it. Gregory at times has difficulty with giving something in a soft way. He
Yes.
just doesn't see I guess, the point in it.
Yeah.
Um, and Jacob needed to hear that day in that
Yeah.
way. Um, and that to me is one of the beautiful things about how this show is beginning to really blossom and thrive, is showing all these characters can exist as they are. We're not
Yeah.
necessarily trying to change them. We just want them to be a little bit more flexible in order to do their job.
Yeah, absolutely. And, on a final note, let's briefly get into his relationship with Janine, because it is still, at the center of the
Mm-hmm.
story in some ways. Because obviously at the beginning of the season, he suggests that they kind of put a period on their relationship, because it's the
Right.
mature thing to do, is what he basically says. He says he does it out of respect, or I think he even
Right.
says. And I'd be curious to hear from you whether you really think he has, as he puts it, put a final period on that relationship. And if so, how do you think he was able to arrive at a point where he could do that? Because it took a lot for him to admit his feelings to her in the first
Mm-hmm.
place. So to be rejected from her in that way must have been a big blow that took a long time to recover from. So do you think he puts a period on it, and how does he even get to that place where he's able to?
I think what you just said is how he gets there. I think nothing gets you closer to closure than a rejection. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That was it. That's I think part of the reason why he puts himself out there at the end of season 2 is I can't deal with this in between, um, for any longer. And that, I do believe, from his perspective, he did put a period on that. I think he logically came to the conclusion that this actually is cleaner. It
Mhm.
actually is better in a lot of ways. It's less complicated.
Right.
Um, Now, whether or not his mind can resolve that with his heart is something that we're gonna have to see. But I
Right.
do think he mentally, after that rejection from Janine, he had a whole summer to really think about it,
Right.
to really think about what he wanted to do. Did he want to leave Abbott now? That was also kind of up in the air at one point.
Mhm.
Um, and I think for him, he just came to that conclusion that it's better this way. We can both do our jobs more effectively and still support each other. So mentally, yes, he put a period on it. Emotionally, I don't know if we really have control over that as human beings.
I don't think we do. Right. I think that's very difficult, but I think sometimes, saying, you know what, I'm gonna put a period on it. I think that's an easier way for someone to just move on mentally, like you said. Whether it happens
Exactly.
emotionally is another question.
Exactly.
All right, but unfortunately, we're out of time. But thank you so much, Tyler, for talking about your character, for talking me through this season. Congratulations on the season, and yeah, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.